Hello, Michael Church, Crawl Space Ninja, Basement Ninja, and today I want to talk to you about some basement waterproofing mistakes you should avoid when hiring a waterproofing contractor or deciding to do basement waterproofing yourself, because if you don't address these mistakes, they could lead to water damage and mold in your basement. Stay tuned. Okay, so the biggest mistake, the number one biggest mistake we see whenever we go to look at a basement that's flooded after a basement waterproofing system has been installed is that they do not do the entire perimeter of the basement. In fact, my family and I were recently looking at buying a house, and we decided not to purchase a home because they did not do the entire perimeter of the basement. And upon further inspection, we found that where they stopped, the water had come in on the walls that were not waterproofed properly, even though there was no evidence of waterproofing on those walls according to the sellers before. So for some reason, if you only do say 50 linear feet of your basement and your basement is 150 linear feet, water always finds a way. And I know what you're thinking. I'm not going to waterproof that wall that doesn't have dirt on the outside of it. Well, let me share something with you. If you live in a part of the country that has high water tables, like we had back in February of 2019, we had 5.5 inches of rain in 2 hours. Well, if you don't have a full perimeter trench, either on the outside of the basement, obviously, but I'm talking about interior waterproofing for this example. If you don't have a full perimeter trench inside that basement, that water table is going to come up. Water can come up either through the slab or work its way up around the footer and into the stem wall or the foundation wall and flood parts of your basement that don't even have dirt on the outside. So make sure if you're going to invest in waterproofing that you do the entire interior perimeter, whether you have walls on the out or the dirt on the outside of the walls or not. Okay, so the second mistake we see is that a lot of people will not extend the downspouts and make sure that their gutters are cleaned on an annual basis. So that's a big thing. You need to get the downspout extensions using either a perforated pipe that's solid. Remember, you want to make sure downspout extensions do not have holes in those pipes, okay? So make sure that whatever perforated pipe you use, or whatever pipe you use, make sure it is not perforated, okay? So you want to have a solid pipe. Now we use a 4-inch sewer and drain line when we extend our downspouts to a pop-up valve or something like that. But you want to get them at minimum 10 feet extended away from the foundation, and I would maybe even consider going further if possible. Get them to where they start to slope down a hill. So if it takes you 30 feet to where that water is going to hit a slope in your yard, make sure you extend them all the way out there to get that water away from your foundation. Now, I hear all the time that sloping soil is going to stop water from getting into the basement. By the time you've got water in your basement, the sloping of the soil is irrelevant because water is already going in. I'm not saying don't slope the soil, but don't expect that to fix it either. When we do basement waterproofing, we like to take a vapor barrier or a panel and go all the way up the wall, so that way hydrostatic pressure that comes into that cinder block or a concrete or foundation wall hits that vapor barrier and then is able to work its way down into the trench that we've installed inside the interior of the basement. So a lot of companies, and you know, obviously budget has a lot to do with this. You as a homeowner may decide, oh, I just want to do the trench and all that sort of thing, and I don't want to do the plastic. Trust me, it is worth the investment not only to do the full perimeter trench like I mentioned, but also to make sure vapor barrier is all the way up, at least higher than the dirt level of the outside walls. Now, if you've got an interior wall, you may only go 2 feet high if you've got a wall that maybe doesn't have dirt around it. But make sure you do use a vapor barrier around the entire perimeter of the basement in order to ensure that water is going to work its way into the trench. Two other big mistakes we see is that, number one, you need to have a sump pump, basin, and sump pump about every 140 linear feet, okay? So if you've got a big basement, you got to make sure that water is able to be captured by a sump pump basin and then pushed out very rapidly. Our basement pits are about 24 inches deep into the dirt below the slab, okay? So if your slab's 4 inches, we got another 20 inches of space down below that slab that we're able to capture water deep underneath that slab. Remember, water's always gonna try to go to the lowest point. So we got these basins deep in the under the slab, around the perimeter of the basement, about every 140 linear feet. So if you're taking on a lot of water in those areas, you're gonna be able to capture that water and redirect it outside as quickly as possible. And also make sure you've got a battery backup system on each one of those basins, because the worst thing you can do is have power outages. When are you going to have a thunderstorm, and when are you likely to lose power during a thunderstorm? And that's when your basement is more likely to flood. So obviously we like the Pump Century 822 as our battery backup, but make sure you put a battery backup system on all of those sump pump pits that you've got inside your basement. Okay, the other thing we see a lot is that people will not invest in a dehumidifier, whether it's a crawl space or a basement. So make sure that if you have a basement, that you've got some way of controlling humidity in that basement. Now, you may choose to do it through the ductwork or just have a freestanding dehumidifier inside the basement. Okay, so I mentioned before about us trying to purchase a house that had some basement problems. Well, guess what they did? They did two things wrong, and these are my last two things I'm gonna talk about. All right, number one was they finished the basement after the waterproofing, not knowing that they did not install adequate amount of basement waterproofing for that situation. So if they decide that they want to sell this house and to do it right, they're going to have to rip out all of the drywall, all of the carpet, all of that stuff to address those areas of the basement that still have issues. And I don't know if they were trying to hide the issues. I'm going to say they weren't. They may not have known. It may have been a budgetary thing or whatever. Or maybe the basement sales person just didn't let them know that what could happen in the future. And even if he did let them know, or she let them know, they may have chosen not to do the full basement based on budget. I get it, right? But what you don't want to do is install all of that drywall, all of the fur strips that goes on there and everything else, and then have to rip all of that out because you still got a problem in that part of the basement that you didn't waterproof. The last thing they didn't do is they didn't insulate the basement walls. If you're gonna go through the trouble of finishing the basement, now if you've got a basement that's unfinished and you're not that big of a worry about it, no big deal. But if you're gonna put in heating and air and all that stuff and drywall and make it a usable space, insulate the walls of the basement before you put up the drywall. And you can even, if you're gonna plan this correctly, put the wall insulation up first, then put that vapor barrier up over it that goes down into the trench of the interior waterproofing system. So those are some mistakes that you need to avoid when you're going to invest your hard-earned money in basement waterproofing. My name is Michael Church with Basement Ninja and Crawl Space Ninja, and we want to help you. So if you need a free quote on your basement or your crawl space, your attic or your duct ceiling, make sure you check out a link below, and we hope you make it a happy and blessed day. We'll see you later.
It's December again, I can't believe